Welcome back to another episode of Varied Voices Podcast, where we dive into all things that keep you up at night. I'm Patricia Davis Brown, your co-host, and today we're going to tackle a fear that haunts people in the strangest places, like circuses, birthday parties, and of course, Halloween. That's right, today we're asking the big question: why are so many people terrified of clowns?
And I'm Stephanie Davis, your other co host, who also can't be trusted anywhere near a balloon animal. You know, Patty, when we decided to do an episode on Coulrophobia, which is the fear of clowns, I thought, how bad could it be? I mean, what's so scary about a guy with a red nose and big shoes and squeaky horn? But then I remembered Pennywise and the Joker and my nightmares from that one birthday party when I was 5.
Right. Clowns used to bring joy, but now they've got people running for the hills. Who knew that a painted smile could hide such a creepy reality? But fear not, listeners. We've brought in some expert reinforcements to help us make sense of all this.
Exactly. So joining us today, we have two brilliant guests who know a lot more about fear than we do. And let's be honest, they probably can handle clowns a lot better too.
We are thrilled to welcome Dr. Frank T. McAndrew. Dr. McAndrew is a renowned social psychologist and professor of psychology at Knox College, where he has spent decades researching human behavior, particularly the eerie and unsettling aspects of it. His groundbreaking work on the science of creepiness, fear, and the psychology of what makes people feel uneasy has earned him global recognition. As an expert in studying why certain things trigger discomfort in the human mind, Dr. McAndrew's research has been widely featured in major publications and media outlets, including the New York Times, The Atlantic, and Psychology Today. He brings a unique perspective to our discussion on Coulrophobia, the fear of clowns, by helping us understand the deep-rooted psychological mechanisms behind this fear. His work will guide us through why clowns, with their exaggerated features and ambiguous emotions, trigger such strong reactions in so many people.
And also joining us today is Dr. Kendall R. Phillips, a distinguished scholar in the field of rhetoric, horror, cinema, and popular culture. Dr. Phillips is a professor of communications and rhetorical studies at Syracuse University, where his research focuses on how horror and other genres of popular media influence and reflect societal fears, which is just so interesting. With a deep passion for horror films and their cultural impact, Dr. Phillips has written extensively on iconic horror figures, including monsters, villains, and most relevant to today's episode, creepy clowns. Dr. Phillips' expertise in horror cinema gives him a unique insight into how characters like Pennywise and the Joker have become lasting symbols of fear, both tapping into and shaping public anxieties. And his work is featured in publications like the Journal of Popular Film and Television, the Journal of American Culture, and explores how these terrifying figures not only entertain, but also challenge our perception of fear itself. Because, yeah, why is it scary?
Right.
So we're excited to have Dr. Phillips with us to shed light on the cultural role of clowns in horror and how they have solidified their place in the nightmares of many. And by the end of this, we'll know whether to book a clown for your next party or just stick to a magician. Although I'm not really sure those are much safer as far as creepy goes.
So, without further ado, let's dive into the world of coulrophobia. Prepare to be creeped out in the most scientific way possible. Dr. McAndrews, I read your paper on the nature of creepiness, and I found it quite interesting. And this paper was to try to figure out the psychological experience of feelings of being creeped out. You had used 4 different hypotheses, and the one that I really want to focus in on currently is the occupations that creep people out. You had mentioned clowns, taxidermists, funeral directors, and sex shop owners. Your studies showed that clowns were the creepiest of all. So, psychologically, what is it about clowns that taps into our fear? And why do so many people experience coulrophobia?
Well, let me start by saying I don't think there are that many people that have a full-blown, heart-pounding terror of clowns. but I don't think there's a whole lot of people that really like them either. And most people have sort of an apprehensive uneasiness in their presence for good reasons. Let me talk a little bit about creepiness and then, get into why clowns fit the bill. Creepiness is about uncertainty. Fear is what you experience when you know that you're in danger, you know what the problem is, you know what you should be trying to do to escape from it. Creepiness is sort of the foreplay to fear. It's that stage where you know something isn't quite right. You're feeling uneasy, you're hyper vigilant, you're really focused to figure out if there's something to worry about or not. And you can be creeped out by a place. You're in a place that feels threatening, but you're not sure there's anything to worry about. Or you can be creeped out by a person. You're interacting with somebody who just doesn't seem to understand the rules. They're steering the conversation in uncomfortable directions. Their eye contact is off. They're doing peculiar things. And this means they're not following the script. And that means you can't predict what they're going to do next. So we're kind of wallow in our discomfort, trying to figure out if this is a person to worry about because we're polite. You don't want to scream and run away if the person you're talking to is just kind of an awkward person who doesn't interact very well. But on the other hand, if there's somebody you should scream and run away from, you want to do that. So the problem we have with clowns is, by definition, they're unusual. They're outside the norm. They have freedom to do things that other people can't get away with. And they signal this in every possible way. They don't dress like ordinary people. They've got the wigs and the big shoes. They have the makeup on, so you can't tell who they really are, and you can't tell what they're really feeling. So everything that we look to in interactions with other people is invisible to us. We're not able to make sense of them at all. And let's face it, clowns exist to put you ill at ease. If you go to the circus and they pull somebody out of the crowd, you know that nothing good is about to happen. I mean, right? They're there to be mischievous, and therefore you're on your guard to begin with. And in the meantime, they're sending out this vibe that I might do almost anything at almost any time, and you don't know what I'm going to do. So I don't think it's any mystery that people are uneasy around them. If we're going to the circus, we're kind of giving the clown permission to be in our presence, and we're buying into whatever's going to happen. But if you show up at a birthday party and you didn't know there was going to be a clown there, and suddenly you're confronted with one, or you're in a hospital lounge and the clown walks in, you're kind of being forced to be in the presence of the clown. And this is uncomfortable, especially when they show up when they're not supposed to be, like they're standing under the streetlight in front of your house in the middle of the night. I've got some personal clown stories that I'll tell you later.
Oh, we are definitely going to want to jump on those.
Going back to the creepiness and it being like the foreplay to fear, do you think that creepiness is actually worse than fear because of the uncertainty versus fear? You know that there's the tiger in the woods versus like you're not sure how bad it's going to be when it's just creepiness?
Well, they're both bad in their own way, right? I'm very unhappy if I don't know if I'm in danger or not, and I'm very uncomfortable. But I'm not a whole lot happier if the tiger in the woods is about to eat me. So I guess I would choose the creepiness because at least there's a hope that there's nothing wrong.
Okay, so Dr. Phillips, can you touch on how filmmakers exploit these psychological fears in horror films?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. First of all, it's great to be on here with Dr. McAndrew, who's a luminary in many fields. So honored to be on the panel with him. And I do think, to pick up on that last point, in film theory, we often talk about the distinction between dread and fear. And dread is that more pervasive, creepy, like, I don't know what's happening, but something doesn't feel right, versus fear, which is the guy with the chainsaws behind me. But there, it's not a question of what's happening. It's like, I know exactly what's happening, and I want to get away from that. But I do think, to pick up on some of the other points that Dr. McAndrew made, for filmmakers, especially those wanting to work in horror, they really want to play with those things that are familiar and make them unfamiliar. And so you think about, really the history of horror is taking things that seem very familiar and tweaking them just enough to make them feel very unsettling. So perhaps the greatest cultural example in American history is, prior to 1976, everybody wanted a beach vacation where you could jump in the water. Then Jaws comes,
Yeah.
and literally you can track the number of people that canceled their beach vacation. Same thing in 1960 with Psycho and showers. There were lots of people who just said, you know what, I don't want to shower in my house because I've now had this image of, and personally for me, I can remember seeing Poltergeist and the thing under the bed. And for years as a child, I would not sleep with my arm hanging over the bed because in my mind, suddenly that bed was a much more terrifying concept. So I think for filmmakers, they're kind of playing with that, taking something familiar, tweaking it, just like the idea that the clown is a person, but not quite right. And I think the only other thing I would add, just thinking about this from a kind of film perspective, is there's also a very deep relationship between comedy and horror. There's a great film scholar, a luminary figure in the field, Linda Williams, and she talks about these as body genres, right? Not only are we watching bodies on the screen, which of course is what we're normally doing, but there are things that we see that really ask us to respond, right? So if you see a comedy, it wants you to laugh out loud, like almost like kind of lose control. I mean, the best moment in a comedy is if you kind of have like you laugh uncontrollably, like you spit out your popcorn because it's just so funny, you can't control yourself. Horror operates a very similar sort of way that if we're successful, at some point you scream and throw your popcorn in the air and you're terrified. And both are operating at that shock level, like something just twists to the point where it's unexpected. In one case, it's unexpectedly funny. In the other case, it's unexpectedly terrifying, but they're very similar kind of cinematic reactions. We can sort of play those just depending on how much we built up dread versus how much we built up a kind of comedic atmosphere. You can almost do the same thing. And in one instance, it'd be terrifying and cause us to scream. And the other instance, it'd be hilarious and cause us to laugh out loud.
I've thought about it. I never really had a fear of clowns. I remember being, oh, I don't know, preschool and seeing Bozo the Clown somewhere. And I just gravitated. I wanted, I was kind of shy to interact with him, but I don't ever remember being fearful. And, I've gone through my life that way, but certainly movies, they do make them very creepy. But here recently, I am drawn to these on social media where they do the creepy clown.
Yeah.
Do a I just watch them. I can't stop watching them. I find them funny because I know that nobody's really going to get hurt, but I know this person's going to be scared to death. But they always do it like in a dark, under a bridge. And you kind of hear something or a ball drops off the bridge as these two men are maybe jogging by, and it makes them pause. And then they hear like clown music. And then they're like, whoa, I think I'm going to go the other way. And I just find myself watching this to laugh, but it's creepy. You're watching this like the most creepy thing that could happen to you. Then they turn and go the other way, and all of a sudden there's confetti, and then they turn again, and there's the killer clown's there and starts chasing them. It's like,
that sounds like a micro example, like a small social media size example of what he's talking about with filmmakers.
Exactly.
So two guys just running a normal thing, and then now it's twisted. Like, why is that ball there?
And it's a big pain. As we know now, every Halloween brings, clown sightings where they just stand there. That's all they have to do.
I think it was about 6 years ago or so. Someone, Dr. McAndrew, will probably remember the exact date, but there was the Great Clown Panic. I remember it was I teach at Syracuse University, and we had this, and students were saying they saw a clown standing outside a dorm, or there was a clown. Now, my guess is half of this was probably someone making it up. The other half was probably just some student putting on a clown mask to freak everybody out. But it became this sort of social panic that I think was tied to the media representations in things like, It and the American Horror Story. It was like the media kind of gives us an image of fear that we can then play with. And that's kind of how the films work, I think.
Yeah, that's right. There was an American Horror Story season that was kind of clown related, and that show is heavy.
2016 was the year where the clown scares were.
Thank you.
I wonder if they'll be back this October. If we'll start having them on the news.
Maybe things do cycle through.
Yeah.
So another question for Dr. Kendall: why do you think that characters like Pennywise from It and the Joker from Batman have become such lasting figures in horror culture?
I mean, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think in some ways it goes back to the core aspect of motion pictures and television, which is they are visual mediums. We call them moving pictures for a reason, right? So as much as there's dialogue and sound and music is all really crucial, at its root, and certainly the DNA of motion pictures is back to that early silent era where filmmakers had only the visual grammar to use. And so the easiest way to draw attention to characters was to make them outlandish, right? So if you go back to some of the earliest films, this like 1896, 1897. So I'm talking right at the very beginning of the technology to project motion pictures onto a screen or onto a wall. There were people that were using clown characters in exaggerated makeup, in the face paint and with prosthetics and things to be these sort of comic, outlandish figures. And what's interesting to me, just if we go back to the very, very early history, really before anybody thought of a genre of film, let alone horror as a kind of genre, a lot of these filmmakers were putting clowns into sort of terrifying situations. There's a great film called The Haunted Hotel by Segundo Duchamp. And it's from about like 1902, 1903. And it is these clown characters appear, sort of stumble into this haunted house, and all these kind of crazy things happen. And it's that kind of blending of the visual distinctiveness. And so that gets picked up. And of course, one of the, I would say, in many ways, unfortunate things that comes from that is that early filmmakers, to depict someone as evil, made them disfigured. Now, the unfortunate thing is it added to a lot of ableism and fear of disability and belief that people who had different shaped heads or different disfigurements or different changes in their physical appearance, that was a mark of their moral character. But it lent itself to creating, if you go back to Jekyll and Hyde, just as a quick example, in the novel, there's no sense that Hyde is some monstrous figure with fangs and hair and, bulbous eyes, like some sort of monster. Hyde is just an evil version of Jekyll. But for filmmakers, especially in the early period where they didn't have dialogue, they didn't have sound, they didn't have soundtracks, for them to depict Hyde as a monster, you had to physically create him as a monster. And so clowns kind of became an easy way to create that visual iconography of someone, as Dr. McAndrew said earlier, someone who's different, right? Someone that's marked as wrong. And so certainly when we see a clown not in a circus, it makes us say, why is this clown out here on the field?
So, Dr. McAndrews, can you weigh in on the intersection of psychological fear and horror movies like It and the Joker play on these fears?
Well, it is kind of perverse, isn't it, that we spend money to look at things and people that we would avoid like the plague in real life. And as a matter of fact, there's even a term for it. It's called recreational fear. People who spend money to go to horror movies or haunted house attractions. But I think there's a method to the madness. If you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, going to a place like a horror movie where you get to watch what you know isn't real, something horrible, serial killers, whatever it might be, it gives you the opportunity to mentally rehearse strategies in a safe way for what you might do if you ever find yourself in a situation like that at some point in the future. So by watching what the characters in the movie do successfully or unsuccessfully and trying to escape from the serial killer, you're learning, okay, I won't do that, but I will do this. And you can hear people in the audience as they're opening the door, they shouldn't open. You can hear people going, oh, no, don't do that, because they're so much into it. And so you can think of it as a rehearsal for possible future calamities. In the same way that we like Jaws, movies about shark attacks. Okay, if I'm ever attacked by a shark, what can I do? And you also learn something about yourself in the process. You learn what terrifies you and what doesn't. You learn what things you need to work on if you're going to be successful in a future situation like that. So we're motivated to do these things because it's good for us. Now, you're not consciously thinking that. I'm going in there so I can pick up a few pointers, but that drive that we have to expose ourselves to that, I think, comes from that.
How has the association with real-life figures like John Wayne Gacy magnified the fear of clowns?
Well, I think it certainly, for people who were suspicious of them to begin with, this confirmed their worst fears, right? Look what this guy did. But it also kind of tricks us into overestimating the likelihood of a killer clown coming into our lives. When you ask people how likely something is to happen, like how likely are you to be killed in a plane crash? How likely are you to be attacked by a shark if you go swimming in the ocean? People will overestimate the likelihood of that happening because they can so easily think of an example. They can remember that story that was in the paper last week of the person attacked by the shark. They remember that plane crash that happened last month. If you ask them, how likely is it that you're going to slip in your shower and hit your head and die? They say, that's never going to happen. But that happens all the time, every day. But because you can't think of an example of it, you underestimate the probability of it. Well, stories like John Wayne Gacy give people a very accessible, easy to recall story about a killer clown. And because they can think of one so quickly, that makes them really believe that it's more prevalent than it is, more likely to happen than it is. And it makes them all the scarier as a result.
Well, the interesting thing of John Wayne Gacy, I'm a true crime fanatic, and I just listened to the tapes of John Wayne Gacy. And interesting enough, even though he was labeled the killer clown, he never actually dressed up as a clown when he hunted his victims and got his victims.
It's just a day job.
It was
he separated work from pleasure.
He was like a certified clown to go into parties. So how did he get labeled by the public as the killer clown? And how did that stick with him? Because I honestly thought that he had done that and he had not. So how do you think, and really this is kind of for both of you, if you can shed any light on that, because I kind of scratched my head about that. Why did they call him the killer clown?
Because it's a very easy association. It rolls off the tongue much more cleanly than, the killer attorney or the killer grocer. It's the killer clown feeds the narrative that we sort of want to believe in. And he wasn't just he painted pictures of clowns. He had sort of a clown obsession, but you're right. When he was actually committing the murders, as far as we know, he was not dressing up like a clown to do that. But I think it's just a memorable thing.
Well, another thing that was kind of interesting when they went into his house, and of course, I got to see all that, he was obsessed with clowns. He had clown paintings and artwork, and he did paint when he was in prison, and he painted clowns. And I think some have sold for a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's kind of a bizarre story. We had in South Florida, we had a murder of a person that dressed up as a clown. There was an affair going on, and the girlfriend dressed up as a clown knocked on the door. And when the wife opened the door, she was shot and killed by this clown. And they ended up catching her like 3 decades later, but through DNA. But it was the perfect costume to do a crime. She was delivering flowers and did that. So that feeds into it as well. I mean, I guess we actually have had that.
The literal killer clown that not many people know about.
Right. And it was a girl, obviously, and that's unusual.
So, Dr. Kendall, to elaborate on how media portrayal of Gacy and the clown sightings has further entrenched clowns as a symbol of terror.
Yeah, I think just to pick up on that conversation, one of the things that's interesting about it really was a particular era of American popular culture that was obsessed with serial killers. Now, the number of serial killers probably doesn't change that much, at least from what I've seen from the FBI. There are probably any number operating now, but there was definitely that period of Bundy, of Gacy, of Berkowitz, where you got this. And I think part of what was going on at that moment was the echo chamber between real life crime and media portrayal of crimes, so that several of these folks, became known partly by virtue of making themselves known. You think the Zodiac, of course, was never actually apprehended. The BTK killer in Kansas, these were folks who were playing with the media. And so part of the way we then tried to understand someone like Gacy or someone like Bundy was through the kind of horror movies we've seen, like Psycho, like Maniac, like other kinds of Peeping Tom, that told us the story of a serial killer. And then there was this moment in the 70s and 80s where there was this echo chamber between media coverage of serial killers and the films about serial killers. And so each one then became a kind of icon, just very similar to like in motion pictures where it's like a visual icon, like, Jason because of the hockey mask, or, Freddy because of his knived glove. So you knew Ted Bundy because he was the good looking one. Right.
Right.
You knew Berkowitz because he was the one that talked to dogs, and you knew Gacy because he was the one that was a clown. You knew Zodiac because you didn't know. It was those cryptic symbols. And so each of those kind of iconic serial killers in that period where the culture was kind of obsessed with these ongoing investigations, each of them kind of almost became media figures, so that then once Gacy has been apprehended, it's easy to then turn that narrative back into a motion picture that picks up on exactly that iconography. He's the killer clown.
Yeah, very true. So, question for, I guess, really the both of you.
Mhm.
Do you think that society's fear of clowns will fade, or have clowns cemented their place as horror figures for good? Because I want to think about Renaissance era clowns, jests, I guess. Were they always creepy, or is that more of a 19th and 20th century thing?
I think they were always creepy. We don't know what people at that time were thinking about them and saying about them, but they existed for the same reasons, right? They were mischievous. They were poking fun at people. They were putting people in awkward situations. It wasn't until the 1800s, I think, that they started to have the extreme makeup and clothing that we know today. But I don't think there was ever a period in history where people said, clowns are good. They're nice.
I'd like to have a clown near me.
I
We're
wish-
going to get angry letters from Clown Union. You realize that we're going to all be in a lot of trouble.
Well,
Take it.
that's a segue to tell my clown story. Back when the clown thing in 2016 was going on, it coincided with the year that my creepiness study that you referred to got published. So I was asked to write an essay for the Daily Beast on why people get creeped out by clowns. Now, I'm not the person who discovered that clowns was creepy. I wasn't the person saying that clowns are creepy. My job was simply, given that some people think they are, why would that be? So I published this essay, got picked up in all kinds of places, and suddenly I became the poster boy for clowns who were losing jobs because people were getting creeped out by them. There was one ringleader clown on the West Coast in particular who was leading the charge. He was stalking me on social media. Anywhere I could be found, he was doing everything he could to destroy my reputation with these long rants. He called the dean and the president of my college in an attempt to, if not get me fired, at least have me disciplined. It was a surreal thing where the dean is sitting there. I have to talk to you about this clown thing because she had promised the clown she would talk about this with me. And this guy left all kinds of threatening voicemails on my phone. I would not interact with him at all. My wife was living in terror that this little car was going to pull up in front of our house some night and all these clowns were going to pile out of it. And the thing about all this is this was all being done in an attempt to prove to me that they're not creepy. So yes, when Kendall just said we're going to get angry, it's not funny.
Yes.
It happens.
And please direct all correspondence to Frank McAndrew. He will handle all this. In fairness, I don't think I can have a conversation with my dean about clowns because in my experience, most deans are clowns, but that's probably something I shouldn't have said out loud. I would just, in terms of the initial question, I agree with my esteemed colleague. I don't think clowns are going to go away for all the reasons he said. I think the other kind of historical through line is this ongoing narrative that the clown makeup is hiding something broken. And that goes back, the sad clown, the tragic clown. In cinema history, one of the kind of iconic early clown figures was a 1924 film called He Who Gets Slapped. And it was actually a Universal big budget film, much like Hunchback of Notre Dame, sort of tragic melodrama. There's another great film, The Man Who Laughs, that was kind of the iconic, the same look as Joker. It's kind of how they got the Joker look with this kind of disfigured face. But there's something about that makeup, that exaggerated smile, that kind of bright color, that culturally we look at that and think, what is it hiding? And in some ways it could be hiding something dangerous, but equally dangerous, and I think this also ties back to the serial killer, is that makeup is hiding someone who's broken. And broken people are really terrifying for all the reasons Dr. McAndrew suggested otherwise. The broken person is the one who doesn't quite operate right, and there's something kind of off base. And we think of the serial killer, we think of the clown, we think of the monsters, all examples of people who are somehow broken, and that brokenness is very threatening to, us, as not only what they might do, but maybe sometimes also because when we look at someone who's broken, we maybe see a little bit of what's going on inside ourselves. So
Both of you, your predictions on the future of clowns in popular culture. What do you think they're going to morph into in the
Or
future?
will they ever not be
Be
creepy?
creepy.
Well, I think if they weren't creepy, they'd be out of business. I mean, they're there to provide us with that experience. Yeah, I think they'll come and go. They'll be when there's an incident that makes them relevant, like another killer clown or another big movie about killer clowns, then they'll have their day and then they'll kind of fade into the background. But I don't expect them to be rehabilitated at any point.
Well, rodeo clowns, I was kind of thinking about like rodeo clowns. They're not scary at all. They're funny.
Nope, that's right. That's right. They're
Yeah.
helpful. They save people's lives. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They're the heroes at the rodeo. So you think that as far as with the popular culture today, they may reinvent by the next scary movie that comes out? What do you think, Kendall, on that?
yeah, I mean, this is the history of horror. Is every time something gets old, we laugh at it, we leave, and then it gets reinvented and comes back in a new, more terrifying form. I do wonder whether the current moment of the clown is going to sustain. It was massive. The It 2, Chapter 1, Chapter 2 were massive global hits. There's a TV series coming out. It remains to be seen whether that's going to get the same attraction. I know Joker 2 has come out and is not looking as good at the box office. At least the initial numbers are not anywhere near the first. So it may be that particular moment of Terrifier and Joker and It and these kind of emphasis on clowns fades back for a while. But I'm fairly confident, as my colleague suggests, that whole painted face, broken, dangerous person is not leaving our culture anytime soon.
Okay, so any final thoughts on Coulrophobia and Halloween? Should people be scared, or you think it's all kind of silly?
I think it's all kind of silly. It's good fun. Your chances of being confronted by a killer clown are pretty slim.
But not zero.
Not zero.
No,
Never
no,
seen
and
it.
I'll continue to watch my social media clips on the scary clowns. They have them all the time. They're so funny. Have you seen it?
I think I have, yeah.
Yeah, I think get ready for lots of clowns, lots of Pennywise, lots of Jokers. You're going to see them. But if you can't see a crazy clown on Halloween, when can you see one? Come on, folks.
That's right.
Exactly. Okay, so coulrophobia. What about how does somebody, if they literally have that phobia, what do you recommend they do?
Well, it's actually one that I think is pretty easy to handle compared to fear of heights or something that messes up your day-to-day life. I think most of us can go about our business most days without encountering clowns. But yeah, don't go to the circus. Make sure you know what's going to happen at the kid's birthday party that you're going to. Stay out of their way.
Help.
Maybe exposure.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know how many people actually
Actually, yeah.
are in therapy over coulrophobia. I bet it's pretty small.
I am sure. Well, again, thank you all for giving a scientific look into why people are creeped out by clowns.
So that was super interesting. So I'm wondering, Patty, have you had any clown experiences throughout your life, positive or negative?
Yeah, I mean, I think all my clown experiences have been positive, and I think it may be our age difference. I don't know, because it was before Pennywise. It was before the Joker. The Joker actually, in my time, when the Batman and Robin movie was out, there was a Joker, but he was just a silly goofball. He really wasn't as menacing as he is now. Now it's like super creepy. But even when my firstborn, when I was pregnant and we had to decorate the nursery, it was very popular to have a clown motif. So it obviously is, I think it's more in pop culture that this has happened with some of these characters. How about you?
I, for one, have always thought clowns were creepy, and it goes back to like a very early, maybe toddler era memory. Some of my memories do go that far. But so I don't think that I had seen any kind of movie or media or comic that depicted a creepy clown, and from that I went, oh no, clowns are creepy. I kind of just have always thought they were creepy. So it's kind of like what Dr. McAndrew said, that element of not being sure who is behind there, because that is what I remember feeling, was like, what is that? Obviously not a person. So I've always thought clowns were creepy.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you don't see a face and you can't see expressions, whether it's a mask, like a cartoon character dressed up, I mean, you just never know what's behind the mask. And so I think that if there is any reluctance with me and clowns, it's just the mere fact that you don't really know who's behind it, right?
Right. Is it a sociopath?
Well, and as we know, I mentioned the clown killer in South Florida. It really happened. It's a perfect costume. It took, DNA
Right.
30 years later to catch her.
That's so long.
I know. And she was with the husband.
Yeah, for me, they're not going to make any kind of comeback. And I can't say I'm really a fan of those popular culture clowns either. Not because they're so creepy, but they don't really hold that scary of a place either in my mind. So if they're not causing a ton of fear, they're just mild creepiness, I'm not into it.
Yeah, I would guess. But what a perfect topic to have for October, the spooky month, right? Killer clowns.
Hopefully, no killer clowns are coming to a neighborhood near you.
We will hope not.
And as always, if you have any topic suggestions, we would love to hear that. Feel free to comment or write in.
Yes, please tell us your killer clown or scary clown experiences. We'd love to hear them.
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.